everybody, and welcome to the second installment of the History X video series. In this video, we'll be covering an aircraft that is frequently overlooked and often not given the respect it righteously deserved. This plane, upon entering service, was the most advanced fighter in the world and had many innovative features comprising a retractable undercarriage, an enclosed cockpit, an all-metal construction, a highly maneuverable and lightweight airframe, and eventually the most potent armament fit found on any single-seat, single-engine fighter aircraft of any size in the world. This resulted in the highest number of aircraft kills accredited to any type of aircraft in World War II. We are, of course, talking about the Messerschmitt 109. The 109 was designed by Willy Messerschmitt, the director of Messerschmitt AG, and as such, we should focus on his life and aircraft design philosophy. This will give you a greater understanding of the origins of the ME 109. Willy Messerschmitt was born on the 26th of June 1898 in Frankfurt am Main. He was the son of a Baptist minister and showed exceptional promise at school. He joined a sailplane manufacturing company called Hearth in 1913 at the tender age of just 15 years. He helped Hearth produce a sailplane, the S5, and shortly after this Hearth joined the army in 1914 to fight for Germany in World War I. Willy Messerschmitt helped to finish off the S8 glider before joining up himself in 1917. After World War I finished, they reunited and Messerschmitt finished his education off at the Munich Technical College. Soon after this, Hearth and Messerschmitt fell out. Messerschmitt formed a new company, Messerschmitt AG in Augsburg in 1924. He honed his design skills and centered on his aircraft having a high wing loading, which made for a higher cruising speed. Unfortunately, this was to prove to be a difficult issue, as it made his aircraft tricky to fly and especially tricky to land. This is the Messerschmitt S9 and was the first sailplane to be designed solely by Willy Messerschmitt. The S10, S12 and S14 gliders followed before he ventured into powered gliders in the shape of the M17. At this stage in his career, the high wing loading philosophy was to prove very unfortunate. The M18 airliner proved to be of limited success due to its relatively small size, but the M20 proved to be a complete disaster. Lufthansa bought several M20 aircraft, and with the second crash of an M20 type, the head of Lufthansa at that time, Erhard Milch, cancelled all further orders and held Willy personally responsible for the death of a very close friend. The Lufthansa cancellation was a serious financial blow for Messerschmitt. He sought orders abroad with sales of the M23 to Czechoslovakia, and this order got him into trouble with the SS in 1933. However, the ties that Willy Messerschmitt had to top brass in Germany through his relations with a man called Theo Kronis linked him to people like Ernst Judith and Hermann Goering. This meant that the SS investigation came to nothing very quickly. After the overseas sales incident, Willy turned his attention to what was to become his most influential design of his entire life, the M37, later to be more famously called the Messerschmitt ME 108 Taifun. The ME 108 was a four-seat light touring aircraft and became an instant success to the point that Messerschmitt AG couldn't cope with demand, and so Bayerische Flugzeugwerke were contracted to fulfill most of the ME 108 orders. This is where Robert Lucer and Willy Messerschmitt became business partners. Lusser, who worked for Bayerische Flugzeugwerke or Bavarian Aircraft Works, hit it off with Willy Messerschmitt from the word go, thus becoming a very potent partnership, just as well when you consider the next two designs Messerschmitt was to undertake. The Me-109 and the Me-110 for the German Luftwaffe. The origins of the 109 trace back to 1934 in the four-seat touring aircraft, the Messerschmitt Me-108 Typhoon or Typhoon. This aircraft had some of the most modern design features found in aircraft construction at that time. It had an all-metal construction and featured a design characteristic called single module housing, whereby the wing spar, the engine mounts and undercarriage assembly were all mounted on the bulkhead in front of the cockpit. This made the aircraft very light, very strong and easy to maintain. The Messerschmitt 108 was a delight to fly, inexpensive and easy to maintain, which made it a very popular choice for wealthy aviators in Europe. When Erhard Milch was appointed head of the RLM, the Reich Ministry of Aviation, in May 1933, he knew that they needed more capable aircraft than the Heinkel HE-51 and Arado AR-64 fighters then in service. The RLM released document CAMT. This called for 4 separate categories of aircraft. Category A was a multi-seat medium bomber, Category B was a tactical bomber, Category C was a single-seat fighter, and Category D was a 2-seat heavy fighter. Willy Messerschmitt undertook design work on the third category, believing his modular housing feature would result in a very effective and inviting design. He also tendered for the heavy fighter category with the 2-seat Messerschmitt Me-110. Under the designation P1034, design work began on the prototype in 1934 with 2 mock-ups. A third prototype, a flying example, was built and flown in May 1935. The first flying example was designated the Messerschmitt Me-109V1, and the test flight program was undertaken. Seen here is Karl Boer, one of the Messerschmitt test pilots, and Fritz Wendel. Both pilots flew all of the prototypes during 1935 to 36, and Fritz Wendel stayed as Messerschmitt's chief test pilot throughout World War II. Now, the Junkers Jumbo 210 engine wasn't available in time, so the Me-109V1 had to be fitted with a Rolls-Royce Kestrel Mark VI V12 cylinder liquid-cooled piston engine giving around 690 horsepower. 2 of these engines were acquired in a straight swap with Rolls-Royce. The swap was made for 2 Heinkel HE-70 aircraft like this one. The Messerschmitt Me-109V2 and Messerschmitt Me-109V3 were fitted with the Junkers Jumbo 210A engine giving around 602 horsepower. These became available for the fly-off in 1935 and 1936 respectively. The Messerschmitt Me-109V4, the first to be armed, first flying in 1936 with 3 7.92mm MG-17 machine guns. 2 of these guns were fitted in the upper decking of the engine cowling and the third in the prop spinner. When the RLM invited major aircraft manufacturers to tender for the single-seat fighter design, Arado, Heinkel, Focke-Wulf and Messerschmitt all tendered. The Category 3 fly-off for the fighter design was undertaken at the Luftwaffe's main evaluation facility at Travemünde. Arado tendered the AR-80, Focke-Wulf tendered the FW-159, Heinkel entered their HE-112, and Messerschmitt tendered the ME-109. The RLM didn't believe Messerschmitt AG could produce the numbers of fighters required per month, but it was later discovered that Milch banned the Messerschmitt entry on personal grounds, mainly because of his disdain for Willy Messerschmitt. Messerschmitt, however, had a card up his sleeve and requested the intervention of Bayerische Flugzeugwerke, and Robert Lucer agreed to tender the aircraft as a BFW design, and the ME-109 was back in the game. The prototypes were manufactured by Messerschmitt AG, as were all of the A variants, but all 109s from the B variant onwards were built by BFW, among other factories, and so the ME-109 became the BF-109. It is also worthy of note that Willy Messerschmitt bought into BFW in 1935 and took control of Bayerische Flugzeugwerke with a majority stockholding. He allowed Robert Lucer to manage the company, but all major decisions were cleared by Willy Messerschmitt. Erhard Milch, the head of the RLM, took an immediate dislike to the 109, favouring the Heinkel and the Focke-Wulf planes in the fly-off. There were other issues with the 109 as well. It had a very narrow track landing gear, and it was viewed as a safety issue, being very easy to tip a wing against the ground, or in some cases to tip forward over its undercarriage because of the heavy engine forward of the gear. However, the limitations of the Arado and Focke-Wulf entries became quickly apparent, leaving the Heinkel HE-112 and the 109 the only contenders for the fly-off. Design flaws came to light with the Heinkel HE-112, showing performance issues stemming mainly from the thickness of the wing. Tension also grew over the fact that the Spitfire was selected to be put into immediate production as the frontline fighter for the Royal Air Force. A decision had to be made, and very quickly. Frustrations were high and evident amongst the hierarchy present at Travemünde, yet Milch still would not accept the 109 as the winner. Ernst Judith stepped in and told Milch that a report would be made to Adolf Hitler stating that Milch was stopping the Luftwaffe from getting the best fighter from the competition. Milch finally relented, and the decision was made to acquire the 109 as the main combat fighter for the Luftwaffe. The Messerschmitt 109 was a sleek and elegant aircraft. It had very clean lines and possessed a thin wing much like the Spitfire. It had an enclosed canopy and retractable undercarriage. These were just some of the innovations, and it also was destined for one of the most powerful engines to be fitted to a single-seat fighter. It was all structured around the bulkhead, utilising a large bracket to which the wing spar, the engine mounts and undercarriage assembly were all bolted to. It had powerful armament, eventually comprising a 20mm cannon firing through the propeller spinner and 4 machine guns, 2 in the wings and 2 in the upper decking of the engine cowling. 2 MGFF 20mm cannons were fitted to the wings on later models. When pilots first flew the ME-109, they were concerned over the safety issues and the high wing loading, but they grew to love the handling characteristics and agility of this aircraft. Its light controls and response was a delight. It was the most capable fighter in the air. The 109 was a truly formidable aircraft. The Messerschmitt Me-109A series was given the Luftwaffe designation of Anton and was based on the V4 prototype. It was powered by the Junkers Jumbo 210A series engine, which provided about 602 horsepower and drove a fixed-pitch metal propeller, giving it a top speed of close to 260 miles an hour. It was armed with two MG-17 7.92mm machine guns, which fired from the upper decking of the engine cowling. The Messerschmitt ME-109A2 variant was powered by the Junkers Jumbo 210B engine as soon as it became available, and this engine provided around 652 horsepower, giving the A2 a top speed of 270 miles an hour, and a third MG-17 gun was added to fire through the propeller spinner. This was to counter the 8-gun fitting found on the Hurricane and Spitfire fighters entering into Royal Air Force service at that time. The ME-109A had a squared framed cockpit canopy, which was pretty difficult to bail out of when in flight, but the tactic of rolling the aircraft upside down allowed the pilot to excite from the cockpit using gravity. Also, various designs for the oil and radiator cooler was tested to rectify overheating issues, and this arrangement was finally adopted in the ME-109A2. Serving the Spanish in the Spanish Civil War as part of the Legion Condor, they wore a silver camo pattern and nationalist markings, but were found to be relatively inadequately armed. It is worthy of note that aircraft the 109 encountered in Spain were mainly the Soviet-built I-153 Chaika and I-16 Rata fighters, and these aircraft types were completely outclassed by the 109. Given the designation of Bertha by the Luftwaffe, the Messerschmitt Bf 109B1 entered service in 1937. It was the first production variant produced by Bavarian Flugzeugwerke, or BFW. The B1 was powered by the Junkers Jumbo 210D engine of 661 horsepower. It drove a variable pitch propeller for better performance, and the general layout was pretty much the same as the ME-109A. Its performance was slightly improved with a top speed of 280 miles an hour and a range of around 430 miles. It had a service ceiling of around 27,000 feet, and tests were performed on wing gun installations, and after strengthening the wings, the Bf 109B2 variant, which had two additional MG-17 machine guns fitted into the wings, brought 5 guns to bear on a target. The Messerschmitt Bf 109B4 was fitted with 2 MG FF 20mm cannons in the wings, but the wings needed extensively strengthening to accommodate this armament. 341 Bf 109B variants were produced at the BFW, Fieseler and Erler Maschinenwerke factories in 1937. The 109B4 was generally equal in performance to the French Caudron CR714 fighter, but it was inferior in firepower. The camo patterns commonly worn by the Bf 109B series were silver grey overall or green grey upper surfaces with light blue undersurfaces. Designated by the Luftwaffe as the Caesar variant, it was only built to 35 airframes in total. It had a similar layout and performance to the B4, but with some revisions to radio gear, and the Bf 109C2 was fitted with the Junkers Jumbo 210GO engine, which provided around 680 horsepower, giving a slight improvement in speed to about 285 miles an hour. They were the first variant to be fitted as standard with the MG FF 20mm cannon in the propeller hub, and this gave the type the heaviest armament fit on a single-seat fighter anywhere in the world. Also, a notable advantage over any contemporary fighter was its superior climb and dive characteristics, and this made it a very potent adversary. The 35 Bf-109C variants generally wore silver-grey upper surfaces and light blue undersurfaces as their camo patterns, and they served the Luftwaffe in these guises throughout 1938. Designated the Dora by the Luftwaffe, the Bf-109D entered service in 1938. It was fitted with a Junkers Jumbo 210G6 engine with direct fuel injection, providing around 785 horsepower. 647 of these aircraft were built. With this engine, the 109 could achieve about 295 miles an hour above 5,000 feet, and it had a range of 390 miles and a service ceiling of over 28,000 feet. The Messerschmitt Bf-109D4 was fitted with the Daimler-Benz DB600AO engine of 910 horsepower. This engine gave the 109 a top speed of around 307 miles an hour, and late production D4s were built with new wings to accommodate MGFF 20mm cannons, and from then on, the principal power plant of the Bf-109 was the Daimler-Benz DB600 series engine. The Messerschmitt Bf-109 Dora variant was inferior slightly to the new British Hurricane and Spitfires, and also the new French Morane 406 and Dwighting D520 fighters. But it was superior to the Gloucester Gladiator and the Fiat CR-32 and CR-42 fighters that still made up the bulk of the RAF and Italian air forces. Camo patterns worn by the Bf-109D series aircraft were either black overall or light blue overall with green and grey upper surfaces leading into the early part of 1939. Designated the Emil by the Luftwaffe, the Bf-109E was completely redesigned to accommodate a new engine. It was produced in 5 main variants. The first of these was the Bf-109E1. Powered by the Daimler-Benz DB601A direct fuel injection inverted V12 engine, producing 1,085 horsepower, this engine drove a variable pitch 3-bladed metal propeller which allowed the Bf-109E1 to achieve 320 miles an hour at around 10,000 feet, and it had exceptional climb and time to height characteristics, giving it markedly superior performance to most contemporary fighters at the time the aircraft went into service in 1938. It had a much larger ventral cooling scoop under the nose to help keep the much larger and heavier engine from overheating. It also had completely redesigned wings to accommodate 2 radiator scoops to enhance the efficiency of the cooling system. Armament fit consisted of 4 MG-17 7.92mm machine guns, 2 in the upper decking of the engine cowling and 2 in the wings. 1,183 airframes were built at BFW between 1938 and 1940. The Bf-109E1 wore light blue camo with 2-tone green and grey splinter camouflage on the upper surfaces of the wings. It formed the backbone of Luftwaffe fighter strength during the Polish campaign in September 1939. The second version was the Bf-109E3, which entered service in late 1939. This version was the same as the E1, but had a heavier armament fit of 2 MG-17 7.92mm machine guns in the upper decking of the engine cowling and 2 MGFF 20mm cannons in the wings. A third MG-17 machine gun could be fitted to fire through the propeller spinner, but this was rarely fitted as often jammed in combat. Wearing this green and grey splinter camouflage over light blue. The Bf-109E3 was the principal version utilised during the French campaign in March 1940. 1,276 Bf-109E3s were built before production shifted to the Bf-109E4. 561 Bf-109E4s were built in 1940, with many E3s being upgraded to E4 standard just in time for the Battle of Britain to begin. They wore this camo pattern with in-theatre yellow panels for Operation Sea Lion over Britain in the summer of 1940. The main change visible in the E4 variant was found in the cockpit, as it had a squared-off frame. Instead of a single panel behind the opening section of the canopy, it had a support strut in the rear of the canopy, and this was cheaper and easier to fabricate. Also, the MG FF 20mm cannon had a revised shell with a much thinner and stronger casing, making for an explosive bullet of heavier load. The Bf-109 E3 and E4 fighters were generally superior to all contemporary fighters at that time, with the exception of the Supermarine Spitfire Mark I and Mark 1A, which it matched pretty closely, and the outcome of dogfights depended mainly on the element of surprise or the skill of the pilots in the cockpit. It is also worthy of note that the supremacy of the Luftwaffe was very firmly threatened for the first time by the RAF during the Battle of Britain, changing morale within the service from confident to shocked. The Messerschmitt Bf-109E5 was the next version to enter production in 1940 and was principally the same as an E4, but it was optimised for reconnaissance and had the MGFF 20mm cannons removed. They did retain the MG17 fit, and 29 aircraft were built. The last variant of the Messerschmitt 109E was the E7, which was basically an E4 with a fuselage station fitted to accommodate a ventral fuel tank of 79 US gallons, or up to a 250 kilogram bomb, in which case the fighter bomber version was designated the Bf-109E7 Jabo. Two versions of the Bf-109E were stationed in the Mediterranean theatre of operations, and these were fitted with tropical filters and designated as Bf-109E4 Trop and E7 Trop. Most E7 variants wore pretty much the same camo patterns as the E4 variants, but the ones sent to the Mediterranean theatre wore desert sand upper surfaces and light blue undersurface camo patterns. 438 airframes were built, the last coming off the production line in 1941. In 1941, Hitler launched Operation Barbarossa, and a large number of Bf-109E4s and E7s were utilised in this operation against the Soviet Union. They enjoyed a markedly high superiority in this theatre, outclassing every Soviet aircraft it encountered. The next version of the 109 to enter service was designated by the Luftwaffe as the Frederick. The first F variant was the Bf-109FO, powered by a Daimler-Benz DB601N engine, rated at 1159 horsepower, and featured a redesigned forward fuselage with a fully elliptical spinner that made the Frederick very streamlined compared to previous models. It retained the MG17 7.92mm machine guns in the upper decking of the forward fuselage, but dispensed with the wing-mounted cannon armament and replaced the wing guns with a 20mm MGFF cannon that fired through the propeller hub. The Bf-109FO was also the only F variant to retain the E-type rectangular supercharger inlet. The FO had a top speed of around 375 miles per hour and first flew in July 1940, but only in experimental evaluation flights. A small number of Bf-109FOs were built, but were all incorporated into production figures of the F1, as they were all converted into F1 standard. The Bf-109F1 differed from the FO by having a new conical-shaped supercharger intake fitted. This became standard fit from this version on. It also had a revised 20mm MGFF-M cannon. This was fitted in the propeller hub, and these aircraft saw some service in the Battle of Britain in October 1940. Between October 1940 and February 1941, 208 were built by Messerschmitt Regensburg, Wiener Nutzstaute Flugzeugwerke, as well as BFW. Most BFW-109FOs and F1s wore Battle of Britain style theatre colours like this. The Messerschmitt Bf-109F2 differed only by having a 15mm Mauser MG-151 cannon in the propeller hub. These cannons were replaced by the harder-hitting MG-151 Mark 20 20mm Mauser cannon when the weapon became available. 1,230 Bf-109F2s were built by AGO, Arado, Erler, Messerschmitt Regensburg and Wiener Neustadt Flugzeugwerke between October 1940 and August 1941. The top speed of the Bf-109 F1 and F2 variants was around 382 miles per hour. The Messerschmitt Bf-109 F2 wore either green and grey splinter camo over blue underside schemes, or various types of two-tone grey over light grey camo patterns. Some Messerschmitt Bf-109 F2 airframes were fitted with sand filters for the Mediterranean theatre. The Messerschmitt Bf-109 F3 was basically an F2 but powered by the Daimler-Benz DB601E engine, rated initially at 1184 horsepower. It gave the F3 a top speed of around 385 miles an hour. Only 15 airframes were built by Messerschmitt Regensburg between October 1940 and January 1941. The Messerschmitt Bf-109F4 was basically an up-rated F3, but utilised the MG-151 20mm cannon as standard fit for the propeller spinner mount, and also it had a higher rated 1325 horsepower Daimler-Benz DB601E engine fitted, which gave the F4 a top speed of 410 miles an hour. It was also the most numerous F variant built, with 1,841 built between May 1941 and May 1942. The Bf-109F4s wore camo patterns similar to the F2s and F3s, but some were sent to the Mediterranean theatre where they wore desert sand over light grey or sometimes light blue undersides. From the Messerschmitt Bf-109F4 there were also a number of sub-variants, and these were the Bf-109F4R1, which could carry two gondola-fitted 20mm cannons under the wings, the Bf-109F4R2, which was a dedicated reconnaissance version, as was the Bf-109F4R3. The Messerschmitt Bf-109F4Z, seen here, was a high-altitude version fitted with GM1 boost system. The Messerschmitt Bf-109F5, of which only one was built, was a tactical reconnaissance version armed with only the MG-17 machine gun fit in the upper decking of the forward fuselage. The cannon fit for the propeller hub was omitted and fared over. The pilot only had one handheld camera, and this aircraft was only used for a very small number of sorties. The Messerschmitt Bf-109F6, as seen here, was a dedicated reconnaissance variant with three types of cameras that could be fitted to the slot behind the pilot. A small number were converted from F4 stocks, and one airframe was fitted with a tropical filter to become the Bf-109F6 Trop. There was also a planned variant called the Bf-109F8 of a variant for high-altitude interception. This aircraft was to be fitted with the GM1 boost system, but the airframe was never built. All in all, the BF-109F variant was a distinct step forward and one that was to hold its shape in all future variants. It flew in all theatres of operation from the Western, Eastern and Mediterranean theatres. It was superior to the Spitfire Mark II, but matched in performance by the Spitfire Mark V. Its 20mm Mauser spinner-mounted cannon was a formidable weapon. Dubbed by the Luftwaffe as the Gustav, the first variant of the G version was the Bf-109 G1 through to G4. They were just upgraded versions of the F1 to F4. Powered by the new Daimler-Benz DB605 engine, producing 1,455 horsepower, giving the 109 a top speed of just short of 400 miles an hour, and later models were fitted with MW50 boost system could achieve more than 418 miles an hour. Around 3,050 airframes built between August 1942 and May 1943. G variants were generally classed as air superiority fighters or fighter bombers. The Messerschmitt Bf-109 G5 was built to 475 aircraft between February 1943 and June 1944, and these were fitted with a pressurized cockpit for higher altitude operations in the reconnaissance role. They were fitted with new Type FUG-16Z radio sets as standard and incorporated two large bulges behind the upper decking mounted machine guns to house the larger bullet feed system for the two 13mm MG-131 machine guns. A new taller rudder was introduced on some G5s to effect better handling at higher altitudes, and these were designated as Bf-109 G5ASs. The taller fin dispensed with the tailplane struts. The rudder had a straight line forward section, and the aerial was mounted on the leading edge of the fin, as opposed to the small moulded fairing on top of the front of the angled line of the rudder on standard G5s. The top speed of the Bf-109 G5 was around 399 miles an hour at 20,000 feet and around 378 miles an hour at 26,000 feet. The next version of the Gustav variant was the most highly produced fighter aircraft version in history. The Bf-109 G6, of which 13,000 airframes were built between February 1943 and August 1944. They introduced the MW50 water injection system as standard, but they also could be fitted with a number of armament fits as well. The standard gun fit was two 13mm MG-131 machine guns and a 20mm MG-151 cannon firing through the propeller spinner. A centerline pylon was also fitted for a 551-pound bomb or a 79 US gallon drop tank. Two wing pylons for either two 20mm MG-151 cannons or two 210mm Wafra GR-21 rocket tubes, one in each underwing station. The propeller spinner could also accommodate a 13mm Mk-108 cannon in place of the 20mm fit. This was applied in the Rustats package, either factory fitted or as a field mod. There was also a couple of features fitted to some G6 variants. The first of these was the taller fin variant called the Bf-109G 6AS. And also the Erler-Hauber canopy hood. These started to come off the production line in August 1943, but in small numbers at first. The Erler hood was a simplified canopy built to address the difficulty of pilots bailing out of the plane and the restricted vision caused by the old squared frame. The Messerschmitt Bf-109 G8 was produced between August 1943 and February 1945 to 906 airframes. They differed only in minor fittings and some engine components. The Messerschmitt Bf 109G10 was built to 2,700 airframes between September 1944 and March 1945, again only differing in minor fittings to the G6 variant. 100 Bf 109G10s were fitted with the taller tail and designated as Bf 109G10ASs. The Messerschmitt Bf 109G12 was an interesting version, as it consisted of taking around 500 airframes from earlier variants and fitting them with a second cockpit to produce a two-seat conversion trainer version of the 109. These conversions were started in around December 1943 and finalised by July 1944. Only around 195 were ever converted into G12s. The last version of the Messerschmitt Bf 109 Gustav was the G14. Around 5,500 standard G14s were built and 1,373 G14ASs were built between July 1944 and March 1945. The Bf 109G variants wore a large number of different camo patterns, loosely based around the two-tone grey upper surfaces with splinter green and grey above the wings. The sides of the G variants wore spotty mottled patches and the undersides were generally light blue or light grey. Some also wore vibrant decorative coloured markings, as seen here. The effectiveness of the Bf 109G variant as a fighter was pretty brutal, usually taking the element of surprise to a new level. It is worth noting that in a dogfight, the G variant of the Messerschmitt 109 was not a match for contemporary fighters such as the P-51 Mustang or the Mark 14 Spitfire it met in the West. But in the Eastern Front, the Soviet fighters found the G6 in particular a very dangerous adversary, and it wasn't until late 1944 that Soviet fighters began to cope with the Bf 109 G6's superior performance. The rate of climb on the Bf 109 was a constant factor for Allied pilots to cope with, as it was blisteringly fast, and even the Hawker Tempest couldn't match the climb rate of a Bf 109G. Now, before we advance onto the next variant, I need to mention the Bf 109GO, as this was an experimental version based on the Bf 109G1. It featured a V-tail. There may only have been one prototype built, as seen in this picture, but the aircraft would have looked like this. Destined to be dubbed by the Luftwaffe as the Heinrich, this aircraft was built in very small numbers in late 1943. The wing was completely redesigned to accommodate a new wider track undercarriage arrangement, hoping this would address the high number of ground handling accidents. It was deemed of little success as it made it hard to produce the Me-109H in numbers, and so the project was abandoned before the end of 1943. Dubbed by the Luftwaffe as the Kurwurst, it was the last major variant of the Bf 109 fighter produced. The Kurwurst was powered by the Daimler-Benz DB605D inverted V12 cylinder piston engine, rated at 1973 horsepower, making the Bf 109K an exceptional aircraft. It had the highest climb rate of any fighter produced during World War II at a top speed of 440 miles an hour. The only aircraft to surpass this speed was the Republic P-47M Thunderbolt, which could achieve 470 miles an hour. However, the K variant had a number of aerodynamic and engineering improvements that made it virtually untouchable as a dogfighter. The Curvurst was built in two major versions. The first, the Bf-109K4, of which at least 1,700 were built between August 1944 and March 1945, the last being built the day before VE Day. The Messerschmitt Bf-109K6 was to be the last variant to see mass production. However, production was concentrated on the K4, and so only one K6 was ever built in September 1944. The Curvurst was such a good fighter that they soon commanded much respect from Allied pilots who found them difficult to cope with. They were very manoeuvrable and had teeth with the G6 weapons fit as standard. They could literally outturn most Allied fighters and easily outclimb them, giving German pilots the ability to engage and disengage at will. The Bf-109K variant was notably superior on all fronts, but by 1945 their use was virtually ineffective, as most were grounded due to fuel shortages and insufficient spares. Most Messerschmitt Curvurst fighters wore similar camo patterns to the 109G variants. When the Kriegsmarine were building up the Navy, they looked at US, Royal Navy and Imperial Japanese doctrine, and Adolf Hitler and Karl Dönitz realized the need for an aircraft carrier. In the form of the KMS Admiral Graf Zeppelin, Germany began to build a vessel in this class. The aircraft types that were earmarked to be embarked upon the KMS Graf Zeppelin were the Junkers Ju-87C attack plane and the Messerschmitt Bf-109T fighter. The T variant of the 109 was dubbed as the Traeger by the Kriegsmarine. The Messerschmitt Bf-109E formed the basis of the carrier-borne Traeger. It was fitted with arrestor gear and a reinforced undercarriage. A centerline pylon was also incorporated to carry either a drop tank or a 551-pound bomb. The gun fit of the Emil version was to be the standard gun fit on the Traeger. In this guise, the Bf-109T was built. The production Bf-109T was powered by the Daimler-Benz DB601N engine, as found in the F variant or Frederick version of the 109. 7 carrier-based fighters were built, all fitted with 2-bladed metal propellers. Another 63 Traegers were assembled after the Graf Zeppelin was cancelled in 1941 because war materials were urgently needed elsewhere. These airframes were designated as the Messerschmitt Bf-109T2 and were built to a modified spec without arrestor gear and fitted with 3-bladed propellers of the type found on the Emil version of the 109. They were distributed to Staffels as complementary fighters and utilised mainly in the reconnaissance role as they had improved range. The Messerschmitt Me-109TL was a stab at fitting jet engines to the 109 as a stopgap in case the Me-262 project was cancelled. The first of these prototypes was the Me-109TL1, which utilised a single BMW 003 turbojet engine of around 1,760 pounds thrust. It also used the airframe of the Bf-109H with the wider track undercarriage and wing. It was armed with two 20mm Mk151 cannons in the wings, but the engine was really heavy and it couldn't generate enough thrust to make the Me-109TL1 an effective fighter aircraft. It was realised that 2 engines would be needed to give a jet fighter enough power to have an edge over contemporary Allied fighters. The BMW 003 engine was just too heavy and it was decided to redesign the Me-109TL1 to accommodate two Junkers Gemmo 004 turbojet engines. These generated 1,934 pounds thrust each. This resulted in the ME-109 TL2, and to keep costs and research time down, the TL2 utilised the wing of the ME-409 and undercarriage from the ME-309 projects. The Messerschmitt ME-109 TL2 would have been faster than the ME-262 as it possessed a slimmer fuselage. It was to be armed with two 13mm Mk108 cannons in the nose, but none were built as the ME-262 project, now showing far better results, gained priority, and the ME-109 TL2 project was cancelled in 1943. The Kriegsmarine were interested in a shipborne fighter that could act as a reconnaissance aircraft to replace the Arado AR-196 spotters. Dubbed the Wilhelm by the Kriegsmarine, it was a proposed floatplane version of the Bf-109. Planned in two versions, the first of these was the Messerschmitt Bf-109W1, based on the Bf-109E as seen here. The second was the Bf-109W2 based on the Bf-109F as seen here. There is evidence to suggest that neither of these versions were ever built, as all the images available are of models or lithographs like this one. They would possibly have met with the same fate as the float-fire Spitfires, as the floats would have dramatically reduced performance, and so the projects were probably cancelled before they even got going. This was an interesting project for the 109, as it was a proposed export version. The Luftwaffe dubbed this aircraft as the Xavier. Originally, the first exploration into this project came in the form of the ME-109 V21 prototype, which was fitted with a Pratt & Whitney Twin Wasp SCG radial engine of 1200 horsepower. The airframe had a wider cross-section to accommodate the radial engine, which made for inferior performance to the standard 109. Some orders did come in via the RLM for access countries' air forces, but none were ever committed to. The Messerschmitt ME-109X was the official Xavier variant. It had a BMW 801A radial engine placed into a Bf-109F fuselage. Although the aircraft project showed real promise, all development was cancelled in early 1942 due to the high demand of the engines for the FW-190 production lines. The 109X airframe had a distinct look of a Japanese fighter about it, the Ki-84 Hi-8. Only a very small number of these aircraft were ever produced, the last built in 1942. Dubbed the Zwilling by the Luftwaffe, it was probably the most unorthodox version conceived, as it was formed by joining two Bf-109F fuselages with a newly designed wing centre section and a new tailplane. There were to be two distinct versions, the Bomber Interceptor and the Strike Fighter. The Interceptor version was to be armed with 5 Mk108 13mm cannons and a centerline pylon to accommodate a 500-pound bomb. The right-hand cockpit was fared over, and the pilot flew the aircraft from the left-hand cockpit. The aircraft also had slightly narrower track undercarriage, which was strengthened to cater for the increase in weight. The second version, called the Bf-109ZZ, was to be a dedicated strike platform and was generally similar, but for a centre pylon able to carry 1,000 kilograms of ordnance. It was armed with two Mk108 13mm cannons and could also carry bombs or a torpedo. The fate of the Bf-109Z Zwilling was sealed by the only prototype being destroyed during a bombing raid in 1943. Hitler ordered the project cancelled after several days of deliberation in 1944. The first 109 Speedster was the highly modified ME 109 V13. On the 11th of November 1937, DIPKY, flown by Messerschmitt's chief pilot Dr. Hermann Verster, set a new world airspeed record for land planes with piston engines of 379.63 miles per hour. Powered by a 1649 horsepower Daimler-Benz DB601R racing engine, he won the title for Germany for the very first time. The second speedster Willie designed was the Messerschmitt ME209V1 of 1937. As you can see by this three-way view, it bared very little resemblance to the Bf109, but it was powered by the Daimler-Benz DB601A engine as found in the Bf109E. Its cockpit was set as far back as possible in the fuselage to keep the cross-section down to a minimum, and it possessed a wide-track retractable undercarriage. The ME209 achieved a top speed of 469 miles an hour on April 6, 1939, setting a world speed record for piston-engined aircraft, and this record was not beaten until August 16, 1969. Darrell Greennamer's highly modified Grumman F8F Bearcat, called Conquest, was the aircraft that took the speed record from Willy Messerschmitt in 1969. The Messerschmitt ME209V1 Racer that set the world air speed record is on display at the Polish Aviation Museum in Krakow. Just to make things a little bit confusing, there was another ME209 designed by Willy Messerschmitt in 1943. It was a proposed replacement for the Bf109 but was hampered by delays in the Daimler-Benz DB603 engine. The prototypes were on the whole powered by the Junkers Gemo 213 engines as found in the FW190D. The Messerschmitt ME209 was to be armed with two Mk103 30mm cannons and two Mk131 13mm machine guns, all housed in the wing roots. After the evaluation of the ME209 V5s proved disappointing, showing that the 209 was 31 miles an hour slower than the FW190D, the project was cancelled before the end of 1943. A number of Messerschmitt 109s were manufactured under license in different countries. The first one as seen here was built under license by Avia Aviation as the S99. It was a Czech license-built version of the Messerschmitt Bf109 G10. 23 were manufactured still powered by surplus Daimler-Benz DB605 engines. A trainer variant of the Bf109 G12, a two-seater, was built as the S99 Mark II, and 21 airframes were built between 1945 and 1947. The factory that stored all of the surplus DB605 engines used in the S99 was destroyed in an explosion in early 1947. An alternative power plant was sourced in the Junkers Gemo 211F as found in the Heinkel HE111H20. The HE111's propellers were also fitted to new aircraft, and it was designated as the S199. The handling characteristics of the S19 were far from satisfactory, with the paddle-bladed propeller creating high torque. Pilots criticised the S19 as being somewhat dangerous to fly at times. 550 S199s were built, and a small number of two-seat trainers were also built under the designation S199 unarmed. Hispano Aviación acquired a license with Messerschmitt AG in 1942 to build 100 Messerschmitt Bf109 G2s. The first 25 were to be supplied by BFW. The license, however, was a farce, as Germany had issues providing enough Bf-109s for the Luftwaffe at this time, and even the drawings were incomplete. Spain received the 25 airframes with no tail sections and no engines, and so were forced to source alternative parts to complete these orders. The Hispano-Suiza HZ-89 Mark 12Z engine of 1300 horsepower was installed, with a total redesign of the forward fuselage to accommodate the upright V12 engine, as the Daimler-Benz DB605 was an inverted engine, and these airframes were designated as HA1109J1s. They were fitted with VDM propellers that performed really only satisfactorily. They served as evaluation aircraft from 1947 until 1949, and they never became operational. The Hispano Aviación HA112K1 was fitted with the improved Hispano-Suiza HS-17 Mark 12 engine. It has similar power but higher torque rating and could attain 370 miles an hour. It was fitted with two 12.7mm breeder machine guns and could carry 80mm rockets under the wings. 65 of these aircraft were built in 1951. They were fitted with de Havilland hydromatic propellers, earning them the nickname the Tripala, or three-bladed. An interesting feature of this Hispano engine was that the propeller spun in the opposite direction to the Daimler-Benz engine, which made for an interestingly high amount of torque in the opposite direction to the German-built counterpart. A two-seater version was built as the Hispano Aviación HA1112K1L and were built in small numbers. The Hispano Aviación HA1112M1 Buchan was the final variant, and it was powered by a Rolls-Royce Merlin 500 series V12 engine rated at 1600 horsepower. With this engine, the Buchan could attain 412 miles an hour. The HA1112M featured a four-bladed propeller and had an intake in the cheek below the propeller spinner, and this is where the name Buchan or pouting pigeon came from. A two-seater version called the Hispano Aviación HA1112M-1L was also built in small numbers. It remained in service until 1965. On the 18th of November 1942, a Supermarine Spitfire Mark 5B, serial number EN830, accidentally crash-landed in Jersey. It was taken to Reichlin to be used as a testbed for experimental purposes. The Germans took the Merlin engine out of the Spitfire and replaced it with a Daimler-Benz DB605N engine. They also switched the 12-volt electrical system for a 24-volt one. The aircraft very quickly came to be known as the Messerschmitt and was extensively evaluated during 1943 to 1944. The results were quite impressive, as the extra 150 horsepower and the direct injection fuel system enhanced the Spitfire's performance. Unfortunately, the aircraft was seriously damaged during an air raid on the 14th of August 1944. It was scrapped at the Clem factory a few days later. Apart from the German Luftwaffe, a number of foreign air forces carried Bf-109s in their inventories. These are as follows. The Bulgarian Air Force received 19 Bf-109E3s in 1940 and 145 Bf-109G variants in 1943. Bulgaria switched to the Allied forces in 1944, and their 109s fought Axis 109s until the end of World War II. Their G variants remained in service until 1946. The Croatian Air Force took charge of about 50 Bf-109Es and Gs. They fought on the Eastern Front, and some were used against Yugoslavian partisans up until about 1944. Czechoslovakia built the 109 under license, and they took charge of about 23 S-99s. They also built the S-199 and took about 470 into the Czech Air Force inventory. A number of two-seat trainers called CS-99 and CS-199s respectively are included in these numbers. They served the Czech Air Force into 1957. The S-199 was called the Messerschmitt in Czech Air Force service. Finland ordered 162 Bf-109G variants from Messerschmitt AG in 1942, with the first becoming operational in March 1943. They remained in service until 1954. In Finnish service, the Bf-109 was called the Mersu. The Royal Hellenic Air Force operated a number of Bf-109Gs left behind after the German withdrawal from Greece. They served from 1944 until around 1946 and were used against Greek insurgents. The Royal Hungarian Air Force utilised 3 Bf-109Ds, 50 Bf-109Es and 66 Bf-109Fs, as well as 490 Bf-109G variants throughout World War II. They were all supplied by Germany, as Hungary was an Axis power. The newly formed Israeli Air Force took charge of 25 Avia S-199s and used them in the Arab-Israeli conflict of 1948 to 1949. The Italian Air Force were provided with some 30 to 40 Bf-109s of various types by Germany and used them against the Allied forces until the Italian capitulation in 1943. They were then used against the Axis forces until the end of the war. Italian forces that stayed loyal to Hitler were supplied with 300 Bf-109Gs and 3 Bf-109K4s. They served against the Allied forces until the end of World War II. The Imperial Japanese Army Air Force purchased 5 Bf-109E7s in 1941. They were used for test and evaluation purposes. The Royal Romanian Air Force had 69 Es, 7 Fs and over 200 109G variants, as well as 124 Gs built by IAR. They served the Romanian Air Force on the Eastern Front until 1944, when Romania joined the Allied forces. They were then used against the Germans until the end of World War II. They remained in service for a number of years post-war. The Slovakian Republican Air Force operated 30 109Es and 30 109Gs until August 1944, where 3 109s were used in the uprising. Slovakia then fought as part of the Allied war effort. The Slovakian cross carried a red dot in its centre. The Spanish Air Force operated a number of ME-109As, BF-109Bs, BF-109Cs and BF-109Ds from 1937 until the end of the Spanish Civil War in 1939. The Germans stationed some BF-109Es and BF-109F models in Spain from 1940 to 1942, but these aircraft served the Luftwaffe. As stated, the Spanish government requested 25 preliminary airframes with a license to build the 109 in 1942. Unfortunately, supply issues ensued and Hispano Aviación had to build a hybrid called the HA-1109. 25 HA-1109Js served from 1945, 65 were taken on charge of HA-1112K1 Tripalas. They served from 1951, and 172 HA-1112M1 Bukans served from 1954. one HA1112K1L Tripala 2-seater and an HA1112M1L 2-seater aircraft also entered service in 1952 and 1955 respectively. The HA1112M1 Buchan served the Spanish Air Force until it was retired in 1965. The Swiss Air Force operated 10 Bf-109Ds, 89 Bf-109Es, 2 Bf-109Fs and 14 Bf-109G variants. They served throughout World War II and the G variant served post-war. The Yugoslav Air Force operated 73 Bf-109Es during World War II, and post-war they operated 53 Bf-109Gs until they were replaced in 1952 by Republic P-47D Thunderbolts. 1426 Squadron RAF was the test and evaluation flight during World War II. Among many aircraft that the squadron received was a Bf-109E3 which crash-landed in France in 1939. 1426 Squadron was responsible for finding out as much information about enemy aircraft capabilities and passed this information to frontline squadrons in order for weaknesses to be exploited. There were a number of other Bf-109Fs and Gs that came into the hands of the flight during the war, but most of the evaluation work was done on the E3 serial numbered AE479. What is the correct term? Is it Bf-109 or ME-109? Well, it has been a confusing problem to which was the correct designation for the Messerschmitt 109. If you spoke to Willie Messerschmitt himself, it was the ME-109, but the RLM insisted on calling it the Bf-109. For the people who worked on it and flew it, the affectionate name was the Messer, or knife. Ground crew and engineers referred to it as the ME-109, but many thousands of documents refer to the 109 as the Bf-109, and you'll also find just the same number of documents referring to it as the ME-109. The Red Air Force and most Western Air Forces called it the skinny one or the Messer. So with that in mind, I think it's a matter of personal taste. So if you call it the ME-109 or the Bf-109, it really is your personal opinion. In total, there are 106 Bf-109s in existence. Some are in flying condition, but most are museum exhibits. This includes the HA1112s and Avia S199s that exist as well. The breakdown is as follows. There are 2 Messerschmitt Bf-109Es in flying condition. There are 3 Messerschmitt Bf-109Gs in flying condition and 11 Hispano-Suiza HA1112M Buchans. All of these aircraft are in airworthy condition and flying in airshow circuits around the world. One of the Buchans is this 2-seater variant. Also, on display in various museums, there is one Messerschmitt Bf-109B, 15 Bf-109Es, 14 Bf-109Fs, 32 Messerschmitt Bf-109G variants, 25 Hispano-Suiza HA1112M Buchans, and not forgetting the 3 Avia S199s, all of which are on display in museums all over the world. There have been a number of high-scoring and quite famous German aces like Adolf Gehland, Werner Mulders and Otto Keitel, all of which flew the Bf-109. But the highest scoring ace in history was a German Luftwaffe pilot by the name of Erich Hartmann. After joining the Luftwaffe in 1942, he scored 352 kills in various different aircraft types, but most were in his Bf-109 G6 double chevron. It isn't confirmed, but it is believed he scored over 55 kills in this aircraft on the Eastern Front. Hartmann scored his last victory on the 5th of May 1945, just hours before victory in Europe was declared. He was handed over to the Soviet forces to be tried as a war criminal, as 345 of his victories were scored between 1942 and 1945 on the Soviet Eastern Front. He was found guilty and served 10 years in various Soviet gulags. After he was released in 1955, he enlisted into the West German Luftwaffe, where he mainly flew North American F-86 Sabre jets. In 1970, he was forced into retirement over his objection to the procurement of the Lockheed F-104G Starfighter because of safety issues. In his later years, he became a civilian flying instructor. He died on September the 20th, 1993, aged 71, but the drama didn't stop there, as he was posthumously cleared of all war crimes by the Soviet Federation in 1997. The Messerschmitt Bf-109 has been mimicked in the movies many times by Hispano Aviación HA-1112 Buchans as movie stars. Buchans assumed the parts of 109s in the Memphis Belle. Here we can see a Buchan assuming the role of a Bf-109E in the film Dunkirk. Here another Hispano Suiza HA-1112M Buchan can be seen playing a Bf-109E in the film Hindenburg. Here again we see an HA-1112M Buchan assuming the role of a Bf-109G in the movie Tuskegee Airmen. But the biggest starring role came when the 35th largest air force in the world was formed for the movie The Battle of Britain in 1967. 42 Hispano HA-1112M Buchans joined the force to shoot the film, 17 of which were airworthy, and the rest were made up from static aircraft, mock-up aircraft, and a single two-seater airworthy variant which was used to shoot some of the aerial sequences. 32 Kaiser 211 aircraft took the role of the Heinkel HE-111H, and 2 Kaiser 352 trimotors fulfilled the role of the Junkers Ju-52 in the film. To play the role of the RAF in the film, 27 Spitfires, 12 of which were airworthy, were also inaugurated into the 35th largest air force in the world, as well as 6 Hurricanes, 3 of which were airworthy. In all, a total of 110 aircraft formed the Air Force. 67 of these were airworthy. There was also 2 two-seater Spitfires and a B-25 Mitchell used to shoot aerial footage. The Messerschmitt Bf-109 was a fabulous aircraft and one that's consistently overlooked. It was a constant thorn in the side of Allied forces in the Western, Eastern and Mediterranean theatres throughout World War II, from the early Junkers Jumbo-powered variants to the Daimler-Benz powered Bf-109s. It seemed to be a plane the Allies had to cope with. It wasn't really until aircraft like the Spitfire Mark IX, the Mustang and the Thunderbolt became available that the 109 was countered in a superior way. The Red Air Force, however, suffered more so at the hands of the 109, as they couldn't counter the 109 threat until late 1944 with aircraft such as the Yak-9 and the LA-5 and 7 fighters. The 109 was always a good performer in the vertical plane, with blistering climb rates that even the Tempest couldn't match, the Bf-109K variant being particularly lethal in 1944 to 45. 109s carried the heaviest firepower of the entire war, and they were built in larger numbers than any other military single-seat fighter in history. 34,852 aircraft. Production started with the V variants in 1935 up until the day before VE Day, when the last Bf-109K4 rolled off the production line. This figure was only surpassed by the production rates of the Soviet-built Ilyushin Il-2 Stormovik at 36,183 by the end of World War II, and over 42,000 in total. Just in case you were wondering, the highest numerically built aircraft in history was the Cessna 172 Skyhawk. This aircraft has been built to a total of 44,000 aeroplanes from 1958, with the production line still churning out Skyhawks in 2025. The Messerschmitt Bf-109 was loved by the pilots that flew them and feared by Allied pilots, bomber crews in particular. In all, the aircraft was, as Ernst Udet stated to Milch in 1934, it was the best fighter aircraft for the Luftwaffe. It became a very influential fighter that served from 1937 to 1945 in Axis forces. When most air forces were equipping with jet-powered aircraft, the 109 still soldiered on in air forces around the world. The Messerschmitt Bf-109, or Me-109, or whatever you want to call it, is a delight to see flying at air shows, and much more rarely seen than the Spitfire or Hurricane. It has a sound similar to a Merlin-powered Spitfire, but slightly lower pitched. I dare you to see a Bf-109 at an air show and not have it bring a smile to your face. Just before we close this video, I'd like you to do me a massive favour and vote for the third edition of the History X series. Please choose from the Curtiss P-40 Warhawk, the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt, or lastly, the North American P-51 Mustang. I hope you've enjoyed this video. I'm sure that it's going to be a very useful tool for a lot of people out there that want information on the Messerschmitt 109. And I hope you enjoyed watching the video, and I'll see you again for the next one. Bye for now.